So
There's no
okay,
ambiguity
so
on that.
maybe there's just like a complete difference of values here, right?
Mhm.
Uh,
Probably.
because I don't want people to die.
How am I doing now?
Sounding a little bit better, and I'll turn you up a little bit on my end so that we don't peak the mic. Alrighty. So you do debates. You like to talk about politics and all that.
Yeah, I've debated with Destiny a few times before.
Oh, okay, cool. What'd y'all talk about?
This was back in 2018. We were arguing about Trump and the economy and his various accomplishments.
Hmm.
So usually I'm considered a conservative. I'm not, traditionally, but I guess in Twitch spaces, I'm considered a conservative. So,
So so like, what are your big issues? What's the stuff that really gets your goat as a Twitter and Twitch conservative?
right now, it'd probably be the vaccine mandates. That's probably the big issue that's
Yeah,
top of mind
everyone.
at the moment.
Yeah, everyone seems upset about those. But which part of the vaccine mandate though is like upsetting to you? Is it the legality aspect, or is it just like the?
I think the legality aspect is pretty well uh, litigated at this point. The issue I have with it is it doesn't make any logical sense for a coronavirus that's like caused through respiratory means. Uh, Also, it doesn't make any logical sense to vaccinate children because they're not really at risk of the virus that the vaccine would be resolving.
Sure, but like we're not trying to keep kids from dying because we're not really worried about them dying. What we're worried about with kids is them being vectors for the virus, right? Because kids can still contract the virus. It's just very, very few of them are going to die or get violently ill, you know?
The problem I have with that justification of it is that it doesn't seem like, number one, we do that with any other type of virus that's killed, I mean, many more people over the course of decades.
Mhm.
And also, all the vaccines that are currently on the schedule for children are vaccines that are for viruses that are uniquely targeting children. As an example, you mentioned, or you didn't mention, but you know that on the schedule, like the polio vaccine, the MMR vaccine,
Mhm.
these are for diseases that were crippling or paralyzing or killing thousands of kids every year. Um, by comparison, since the start of the pandemic, I think it's been a little bit over 600 kids that have died with COVID as opposed to from COVID. I mean, they die more from the flu, which is not a mandatory
Right, but
vaccine that's
again,
on the schedule.
like, but that's what I was bringing up earlier. It doesn't seem like we much like, or we're not much worried about a bunch of kids being genocided by COVID-19. We're worried about them uh, being vectors for the virus that it would be then infecting like their teachers and cause maybe like the school to shut down because of something like that, right?
I mean, I guess my response to that would be that 60,000 people roughly die every single year from the flu in this country. And yet, over the decades, I mean, over the course of one decade, you've matched COVID, which has happened over the course of 2 years. So, sure, fair enough that it's not, it doesn't spike as quickly or it's not as pertinent to us in the immediate future to have like a flu vaccine be mandated. But over the course of the last, what is it, 50, 60 years that we've had the flu vaccine, there haven't been any requirements for that on any district wide or statewide level, even though it kills 60,000 people every year.
Well, sure,
And in
but
fact, the
like the
flu kills more
reason,
children.
but like the issue that we're having, right, is that we have number one, we flu is endemic, right? It's something that is already in the population and something that we see every year, and it's less transmissible and less deadly than coronavirus.
It's less deadly for who?
I mean, for all the same comorbidities for like all people.
Yeah, okay, so I agree that it's more deadly. I disagree with you that over time it hasn't been. I mean, look again. This is about one decade's worth of flu deaths that we've experienced in 2 years. So you say it's like 5 times as deadly, maybe 6 times, and it's going to become endemic. And it's going to become
Yeah, at this
endemic very
point, yeah,
quickly.
because we didn't get enough people vaccinated. It would have been nice to have nipped it in the bud before there were a
I
bunch
don't
of
think that's the case.
variants.
You can look at other countries that have similar obesity rates to us. It seems like the big correlating factors, more than vaccination rates, are obesity and age with this virus.
Wait,
Um,
for what?
for correlations to hospitalization or death. I think I saw that 70, and this is a shocking statistic, that 78% of the people that were hospitalized, much less died, but hospitalized with COVID, were obese.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's for a virus that uniquely targets older people who are disproportionately not obese
well,
by a
no, it
lot.
doesn't target them, right?
Sure.
It's it. Well, they're just more likely to die from it, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean by target. Like otherwise,
Okay.
it's like a mild it's a mild flu for most people.
Well,
It's the
not necessarily. Like this is my problem
Hey,
with this
that's pretty
conversation.
nice.
When we talk about coronavirus, there are other extant things from coronavirus that happen to us that don't happen to us with the flu. So, for example, we have like long COVID, right?
Yeah,
You know,
that's like some nonsense. That's on like if I came up with something like that as a form of my argument, you would rightly call me out on it because there's no official prognosis for long COVID. There's no even real consensus around what the symptoms are for long COVID. It's some ambiguous notion of like you're tired all the time or you can't run there's
Eh,
no medical
no, this
consensus
is
on what it
no.
is.
What do you mean? There's no medical consensus what it is? They know that there are long-lasting effects from COVID, from getting sick with
So when
COVID
somebody
and
tests
having visible.
negative,
Well, really quick, they have like lung, liver, or kidney scarring. They can have massive shortness of breath or even cognitive issues, like a brain fog. Like, do you think that all the
no,
people
those,
that
those
have these
things
things
are
are
those things are measurable, but they're also very rare. Even they're obviously in relation to the overall number of infected, the net numbers, like the raw numbers, are going to look bad because it's been over the course of 2 years and it's an extremely infectious virus.
right? But that's the
Um,
point. Like that's the point. Like it's an
well, it's
incredibly
my point
infectious
actually
virus.
because once the virus becomes endemic, which happens after herd immunity, regardless of whether that's vaccine induced or natural immunity induced, it becomes in essence it correlates or not correlates with it evolves alongside of and with uh, the influenza, the seasonal flu, just like H1N1 did, just like swine flu.
But those
Um,
are all flus. Wait, hold on. When I'm just like confused on some of the words that you're saying. It feels like, one second. I'm gonna pause my game. When you say it evolves alongside the flu, what do you mean by that?
like I'm nearly positive that even the Spanish flu the Spanish influenza it turned into the seasonal flu, or it came alongside the seasonal flu at some point, evolved into the seasonal flu.
Okay,
So
no, no,
even
no,
though they
no.
killed a large proportion
They're
of
just
people,
they're just different. They're just different flus.
well, no, now it's become the seasonal flu. We consider the Spanish flu and its evolutionary ancestors or its current whatever progenitors. We consider that the influenza at this point. If you test positive, you can't test positive for the Spanish flu anymore, although it does have its descendants, its evolutionary descendants in the current flu that we experience every season. Do you doubt that, or
I,
because I can
I'm
find
I'm trying to
documents for
figure
it?
out. Are you saying that when that they have merged together and have like
Yeah,
converged
that
on
happens
their
with nearly every, especially respiratory coronaviruses. That happens every time that a pandemic happens. It eventually becomes endemic with
I
a
don't
respiratory virus.
think that this is true at all. I think that there are different ways in which like if you get infected with like let's say you get infected with coronavirus and then you get infected with like two different variants of it, like those can mix in your cells, but I don't think that it just converges into a like something that we would call the seasonal coronavirus or the seasonal flu. That's just not how
Well,
that works.
H1N1. I mean, this is the pathway of all major pandemics. They last usually for about 2 years, 3 years, especially the ones that are quick moving like this one. The overall point in all this is just to state that to vaccinate children for something that you know is going. First of all, the vaccine wanes in efficacy over the course of maybe 6 or 8 months. That's the data that we're getting from Israel.
First became a communist.
So unless you plan on vaccinating children literally every 8 months, and maybe you do, I mean, maybe that's your position. But for a virus that adapts this quickly because it goes through the population so quick, it seems like an irrational policy to have to vaccinate children for something that's eventually going to become endemic, like the seasonal flu. Unless you also
Okay,
plan to force vaccinate them for the seasonal flu.
really quick. I'm going to move us into a locked channel because I don't know who this Peter Griffin person is. So I'm
Okay.
gonna move. That's what I was trying to do at the beginning here. One
Give me
second.
1 second to get a water too, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely. Saphir Neon,
So
if you have,
here's an
yeah,
article. This isn't a scientific journal, but if you want, I'll post it. I'll give it to you.
yeah,
It's
just
an
shoot it
article
in.
from history.com. It says why the 1918 Spanish flu never really ended. It eventually becomes endemic. People develop herd immunity to it. And uh, yeah, it becomes a flu that we deal with on a seasonal basis as opposed to a pandemic. Do you debate that though? Like, do you think that? I mean, even I guess it doesn't really matter. I want to see what your position is based on
Sure.
once you
So,
agree to this.
what was the question? Sorry, all the
Well, I guess
distractions.
like once you've solidified that, which I think you eventually will, that these pandemics eventually become endemic
Mhm.
and they become something that we have to deal with on a seasonal basis as opposed to year round because they become less deadly, more infectious actually, but less deadly. That's the trajectory of most viruses like this. And it's also a respiratory virus. So like the mass situation is totally irrational. Makes no sense. There's
No,
actually a lot of
that's
data.
that's actually something that I would like to see us do more often. I mean, if you look
Yeah, I think
in
it's even.
places
I
like,
think it's totally ridiculous.
but if you look in places like Japan or South Korea or in any like East Asian country, they do that shit all the time. Like they've been doing it for decades, just walking around with masks when they
Yeah,
feel
and
sick,
some
when they have a
might
cold,
say,
and it's like a way to make sure that you're being polite to everyone else in your society, that you don't
mhm.
get them fucking sick, right? I would love to see more people in the U.S. do that.
Yeah, I would say that number one, we could debate about the efficacy of that for something like this, where it's an extremely infectious virus, where like a very small number of microparticle droplets could get you infected. But also, I would say that we have different cultures for a reason between us and Asia. We're definitely a more individualist culture here. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's actually, hopefully, a source of our strength. If not, I mean, I think we're going to find out in the next few decades here which of these
Yeah,
two
but
models
I
is more
just don't.
important.
I have enough faith in people in the U.S. and in Europe and in the West. Uh, I have enough faith to think that we're not too fucking stupid to be like so individualistic that we would intentionally just say fuck you to masks in order to get other people sick because we're
Well,
our
my
own
point is, they don't
individual
even,
agent.
even if that was your position, they don't even work for this particular virus. This virus, it doesn't make any sense to wear masks in
No,
any setting.
okay, we need to pick one of these lines to go down because we're talking
Well,
about
let's start
mask
with kids because
and yeah.
once I get the kids going, like once you agree with me at least in part, which I think you eventually would, if you look at enough data on the children with regards to vaccination and masks, I feel like that kind of opens the door to me winning on, young people in general, people that are healthy, non-obese, etc.
Okay, well,
So
hit me up.
the
So
kids
why?
stuff, like the kids and
Yeah.
mask stuff, I think that a lot of data has come out of Europe. Like they've multiple studies have come out of Europe, pretty much confirming that uh, there's no benefit to inoculation or prevention in infection in school systems that force mask mandates on children. That's pretty. I think the data on that's actually very, very strong and much
They're
stronger
saying
because of
that
the
there's no
population.
positive benefit to it at
Right.
all.
There's been no marked increase or decrease rather in infection rates between schools that have masked versus ones that didn't, which makes sense knowing what we know about the virus. I mean, the virus, it spreads the same way that you can smell something. If you could smell somebody smoking a cigarette through your mask, that's the same method through which you would potentially get infected with the virus. The same exact concept. So, unless you're, I mean, I don't know if you've worn like a lot of
So,
masks. You're wearing the N95 mask is about the only one that is efficacious against the virus.
so wait, no. Smoke is a like a vapor or like ash in the air.
No, I'm talking about the way that you receive it, the way that you smell
Sure,
smoke. That's through the same method through which the virus is
through
spread,
your
which is,
nose. I'm just
yeah,
confused.
respiratory droplets. Yeah.
Yeah, and a mask is in front of your nose and mouth.
Right. But you can still smell things as you're walking down the street, right?
So like that's why we encourage people to wear masks because when we have a virus come into us, right? We want the least amount of particles to go out into the air as possible, right? We don't expect the masks to stop so many coming into our masks. We want it to stop it from going out, which is why we encourage people to mask up, right? To protect others, right? Now, the mask does stop some from coming in, obviously, because of the way that masks work, but it's really to keep the particles, like the respiratory particles inside of your mask, because the air might go out, but like the way that the airflow works, a lot of the liquid particles and solid particles stay inside of the mask, which leads to less viral load going into the air, which leads to even people who are immunocompromised. If they take in some of that virus, it's going to be less than if everyone was walking around unmasked, Ollie Ollie Oxen freestyle.
I think if you were talking about something that was far less infectious, like let's say the seasonal flu,
this tracks across all kinds of infections.
It does not track in this case, though, because of how infectious the virus is. And that's why the data coming out of Europe pretty much confirms that, especially in schools where children have a quick immune system and they usually respond within a few days, and they're usually okay within a few days, that the masks make no difference in terms of infection rates. And not only that, I mean, it's pretty clear at this point that the only people at inordinate risk for this virus, especially at this point, and this is getting more and more true the longer we get into the pandemic, are the obese, the people with significant comorbidities, and the elderly. And those people should be vaccinated. I'm not against vaccination for people in general or people that just want to be vaccinated. I'm saying that mandates don't make sense for this type of virus, precisely because of how infectious it is. And because of the nature of these types of viruses, it makes absolutely no evolutionary sense.
Okay, this is what I keep on going back to, and you haven't answered me on this. If the point of trying to get even children vaccinated is to stop the amount of vectors going around, right? Having fewer people be vectors for the virus, right?
Yeah, I would ask you why that's not the case for the seasonal flu and hasn't been for decades.
Well, it is. That's why we have people get the flu shot every year.
We don't force anyone to get the flu shot to get a job or to go to school.
But again, we have some jobs do require you to get the flu shot every year, right? Like if you're a nurse or if you're a doctor, right? And that hasn't really
true. Nurses don't have to get the flu shot. Doctors don't have to get the flu shot.
Some hospitals and some clinics do require you to get it. When I worked at a fucking vet hospital, dog. Yeah. I worked at a vet hospital and I had to go and get the flu vaccine if I wanted to come to work.
Well, right? One or two hospitals, just like one or two schools that require the flu vaccine, don't make a rule. I mean, this obviously.
Well, it makes a rule in those places. What I'm trying to say is, right, when we're talking about the flu, there are some places that do require you to have a vaccine in order to come to work, right? Which is like the big contention here. The second thing is, when we're trying to get people vaccinated, we're trying to reduce the amount of people that are going to be vectors for the virus for multiple reasons. Number one, we don't want people to get fucking sick. Number two, we don't want there to be any new variants that come out of COVID.
Variants come regardless. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that variants are coming because of immunity that's instigated by the vaccine.
No, that's how bacterial infections work. That's
how both infections work.
No.
There's not a single virologist says that this virus does not adapt in its mutations to overcome obstacles, including vaccination, including a vaccine-induced immunity. Absolutely.
No. Viruses are passively versus bacteria, which would be actively evolving.
Explain that to me.
So bacteria actually have the ability to split their own cells, right? Whereas viruses have to go into a body in order to reproduce. You recognize this, right?
So what's the significance of that?
So if you stop people from being able to get infected or reduce them,
that's not what a vaccine does.
That's
not what a vaccine does.
If you let me finish a sentence at a time, yeah. So like if you either stop or reduce the amount of people that are getting infected, or you increase the efficacy of a person's biology, right, to fight against that virus, then you reduce the amount of times that the virus is able to replicate. Whereas with a bacteria, right, they replicate themselves and they can replicate outside of the body or inside of the body. And you can, like if you wash your hands with antibacterial soap, right, there are some of the bacteria that are going to be able to survive that. And then
those are ones that reproduce.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what you're talking about with, and I can accept that with bacteria, but with viruses, they do have to go into your body and replicate inside of your body in order to do that.
Two things. Number one, I agree with the latter part of what you said, which is different than what you originally said. You said that this is in an effort to prevent infection. The truth of the matter is that the vaccine does not put a force field around your body to prevent the virus from getting inside your body. What it does is it prompts an immune response once it actually comes inside your body. So the immune response is what matters, and how quickly your immune responds to the virus once it's infected is what the vaccine is hoping to bolster and to enhance. But
right, but
with
it gives you
children, the immune response is quick. With children, the immune response is even quicker in some cases than with vaccinated adults. And I think on average, that's actually the truth of the matter.
I don't know about that, right? But what the problem is, right? But what the problem is if we have a bunch of kids, right, that go into a school and they're coughing and hacking up, right? And even if they're fine a couple of days later, right? Then they can still infect their teachers. And then we have another part of our workforce that is out for the count, right? Well, not necessarily for the count, depending on the age of the teacher, right? But I think even teachers skew older in a lot of parts of the United States. So
yeah, that would make sense if they're older than average. Sure.
Yeah.
Like
so like
we're
putting that entire workforce, right? But we're still talking about the vectors that are getting them sick in the first place, or the amount of people that can throw that virus all over the place, because those kids are going to be going around their grandparents or their parents, right? They can be a vector for the
vaccinated themselves.
And
the reason why this is such a big, all these people that you're mentioning, their parents, their grandparents, their teachers, these people have the option to get vaccinated themselves if they feel they're at risk.
Right, but you even said that the vaccine doesn't put a force field around you in order to
it prompts an immune response. You're saying that the immune response is so efficacious that it matters more than the natural ability of a child, which is very strong, to overcome the virus. If I agree with you on that,
but the natural response is yes, you're right. No, I'm agreeing with you.
Let me finish. If you're agreeing with me on that, then you have to agree that once that immune response is induced, pardon?
Just one part of it, but go ahead.
I'm just saying that if you and I both agree that the vaccine is meant to produce an immune response or to prompt one, and that in many cases that immune response would be beneficial to children even who already have a quick immune response, then you have to agree that those people are protecting themselves once they become vaccinated. And I don't see the reason why we would need to vaccinate people that are not at risk. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, so let me see if I can figure out where you're coming from, because I'm still not understanding why you don't understand the vector thing, which is, I believe, the biggest issue that we have. The amount of children that have died from COVID or even with COVID is fairly small, all things considered, right? But when the two things that you haven't changed my mind, Steven Crowder style, all right? The vectors, right? We want less people to be carriers for this disease that can, spread it to other people that either can't or haven't gotten vaccinated yet, right? And then two, the mutation that I am particularly worried about, which lowers the efficacy of the vaccines that we already have.
Well, the virus is constantly evolving regardless, and it will constantly evolve, just like the seasonal flu. The reason why the seasonal flu vaccine is only efficacious at a rate of like 30 to 40% is because it's developed 6 to 8 months prior to flu season. So by the time flu season rolls around, we don't even know what the strain is. We're roughly targeting the evolutionary ancestor of a virus that 6 months ago hopefully looks similar or acts similar to the one that we're vaccinating people for every single flu season. It's the exact same concept, but it's on overload. This virus almost evolves as quickly as the seasonal flu, which is unbelievable. That's why it's so hard to vaccinate against. And it's why in many cases you see surges of infection after vaccination or mass vaccination, like in Israel. And I don't think that you're going to get rid. I mean, again, that seems like a very lofty goal. Almost no country on earth at this point, including Australia and New Zealand, have a policy for zero COVID, or to try to eliminate or stamp out COVID. No virologist says that we're going to out-vaccinate this virus. There's not a single one that says that.
No.
There's
okay, so the claim that gets
the virus.
Really quick, the claim that they have made that is getting kind of like misunderstood through like the telephone of people explaining it to everybody is that they said we're not going to eradicate COVID, which people are like through the game of telephone saying, oh, well, we'll never be able to, go back to normal even with the vaccine. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying we're not going to eradicate it. We're not going to be able to, like polio, go around and make sure that it's not a virus that spreads in humanity. But what they are saying is that we're going to be able to bring it down to a level that is manageable, right? That is fine.
But that's going to happen anyways. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy right there.
That's necessarily.
Inevitable. Yes, it is. Just like the 1918 pandemic that killed 2 million people. It's going to eventually become endemic, and at that point, it becomes less deadly. It's inevitable that it's going to do that.
So
there's no ambiguity.
So maybe there's just like a complete difference of values here, right?
Mm-hmm. Probably
because I don't want people to die, right? We could, and I agree. Like there is the ability for us to just say fuck it, ollie oxen free. At the very beginning where people were talking about herd immunity, no vaccine needed. We just do things as normal, right? But there's two problems with that. Number one, if we're assuming, let's assume we're like super fucking powered and we build a whole bunch of fucking hospital beds and we like build extra hospitals just for COVID patients, right? We don't have to worry about the supply line of our hospital infrastructure crumbling, right? Which was the biggest concern at the beginning, right? Because there's a higher death rate without medical care than there is with medical care, right?
I mean, you would agree that's not an issue right now.
Right this second, no, it's not. So the problem that I have, right? So if we just did that, right, and we're assuming everything else is perfect, we're still looking at 1% of the United States population, or like around 1%, that dies. And that is 3.5 million people. That's a lot of fucking people. All right. Even if you were to bite that cost of human life, right? You have to look at the other side of this, the economic one that we're like worried about crumbling as well, right? We want people to go back to work. Well, if we're worried about people going back to work, how do we know that in this world where 1% of the US population is crumbled, right, is just wiped out, that people aren't going to be too scared to leave their fucking houses because they see so many people fucking dying around them?
I see. That's not only is that hyperbolic, but it doesn't form out over the facts, even in the worst case situation that we've been in.
You don't think
like
that if there was
you take the least vaccinated state in the entire union, what is it, like Kentucky or Alabama or something, probably?
Probably.
And there's
Alabama.
not even probably one of the two. One of those southern redneck states. They're not getting people aren't dying in the streets there. And by the way, 1% of our population dies every single year. Now, I'm not saying that it's acceptable that people die unnecessarily. I understand. There's
right.
First of all,
what's the rate that they called it out?
Let me make 2 points real quick, if you don't mind. The first one I would say is that a significant percentage of those COVID deaths that are listed are absolutely 100% with COVID as opposed to from COVID. There is no doubt about it. And you can go through the way that they do postmortem testing. You can go through the hospitalization rates of COVID where they test people that came in from a fucking arm injury and who got COVID in the hospital, and they count towards hospitalizations with COVID. I mean, we can go across the board. The way that they tally deaths in this country around COVID is completely ridiculous, but I understand why we do it, because you want to be safe rather than sorry.
I want to do 1 point at a time. All right.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, because I've written down a bunch of points and I've only addressed like one at a time through all of the points that you've thrown at me. And I'm not like mad about it. Just, yeah. So first off, the significant number is just comorbid. They're dying with COVID rather than from COVID.
Mm-hmm.
How many people die of old age? How many people die of cancer? How many people die how many people die of AIDS? How many, there are a million diseases out there, right? That people don't die from that one thing. They die from
complications that arise around it.
Yes, exactly. Right. And that's what is happening with COVID. These people might not have died or might have completely recovered from their original condition if they hadn't gotten COVID and then died. Right. So yeah, of course we're going to see some amount of people that die from COVID, right? But it's going to be very small because that one virus isn't going to be like the sole cause. It's people with comorbidities, right? So dying with COVID, right, is going to be like the thing that pushes them over the edge, which is what we're trying to avoid. So I don't really care about that argument. Of course, there's
Well,
going to be
here,
people that die with COVID.
okay, but here's what you're asking people to do. This is where I get into like the values question that you were posing earlier, and I agree that it's definitely an issue of values. You're asking children to take a vaccine that has no long-term studies completed. By definition, it can't. There's no long-term studies that could have come about from this. To take a vaccine that could potentially have long-term issues, or I mean, it does have short-term adverse events. We know that for certain. People have died from the vaccine. How many of those young people with no comorbidities that had all their lives ahead of them are you willing to forsake in order to save, a couple or even a bunch of, people in their 80s and 90s who have comorbidities? I don't see the value. I don't see how you're weighing these things in a fair way. I don't think that that's a fair ask for parents to make, especially to take their children and put them at potential risk of a vaccine-induced injury or even a death.
But the vaccine-induced injury is so fucking low. That's my problem. When we look at
it does happen.
But so does dying of COVID. But you seem
to. It happens. But no. This is where the risk reward factor comes in for children, especially, is that there's been studies, and the one that was, I don't know if you've seen I'm assuming you've seen the Joe Rogan Sanjay Gupta.
I saw like a 10-minute clip. I couldn't find the full clip.
You should watch it because he kind of lays it out in a pretty brilliant way. And the reason why Sanjay Gupta is getting so panned in that interview is because he wasn't able to answer the questions. It's impossible.
If you have a link, I didn't know where to find the full thing.
It's on Spotify. I'll get it to you when we're done.
Yeah, thanks.
The point being, there's been studies that have confirmed 12 to 15-year-olds as an example. This is a huge study, millions of people covered between the United States and the UK, where the boys, adolescents between the age of 12 and 15 are 4 to 6 times more likely to have a vaccine-induced myocarditis. That's one vaccine-induced injury, just one.
4 to 6 times injury. More than what?
4 to 6 times more likely to get myocarditis from the vaccine than to be hospitalized for any reason because of COVID. So you're asking them to take a risk for what purpose? In order to save 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds? And by the way, the risk is taken on an individual level. So it's not like you're looking at a spreadsheet.
Well, this is the 2 points to that. Even if that is true, right? If the chances of being hospitalized as a 12 to 15-year-old is 0.000001%, right? And then we increase that 6 times, that's 0.00006% chance of getting myocarditis, right? That's also a temporary heart condition. And
first of all, there's no such thing as a temporary heart condition. All heart injuries are permanent by definition. You can't go and fix heart tissue. It doesn't really work that way. The second thing I would say to that is that might be true. They might be very rare in both situations for the 12 to 15-year-olds, but that's a cheap response to a family that's lost a kid because of a fucking vaccine that was forced upon them. And which, by the way, the media will never admit or even talk about was induced from the vaccine itself. Like that's another slap in the face to anybody that's been injured. So think about what you're asking people to do. In a society where people don't seem to really have much care for each other because we haven't, and this is where me and you might agree because I'm not conservative in this regard, we should have fucking universal health care. You want me to take a risk for people that are older than me who have not paid into a system of universal health care but now want to reap the rewards of my risk for their reward? Then why did I grow up in a situation where I had to work minimum wage with no health care and anything could have happened to me and they wouldn't pay the taxes necessary to fix my problem when I'm young and I have all my life ahead of me? But now I understand. It's about risk and reward. It's about a transaction.
I feel like I feel like it is a you're doing like the death panels thing, but on an individual basis, right? Where everyone was like super upset about that when we talk about, like, well, when we get into the healthcare system, when we're trying to, in emergency situations or in like, large scale situations of trying to choose who gets medical care, like some people are going to get healthcare and some people aren't, and everyone gets angry about that. But when we get into this situation, now we're like super upset about that. Also, inflammation of the outer lining of the heart, and I'm seeing that it's temporary, the myocarditis.
Yeah, well, that's probably the case that it's temporary, but it's still a permanent injury. Just like I mean, there's a bunch of things that can happen to you for only a brief period of time, a bunch of conditions that have long-lasting effects. You mentioned long COVID. The only reason why it's considered long COVID is because you test negative, but you still have the residual results of what happened from COVID.
Okay. Do you know what if most cases of myocarditis are self-resolving, right? Like I'm saying on CDC, right?
Just like most cases of COVID are self-resolving, sure.
All right. What are the long-term effects here?
The long-term effects could be fatigue. The same thing, almost. It's almost ironic in the sense that they could be the same exact things from COVID, minus the brain fog, maybe. Inability to exert yourself. I mean, you can look at the injuries of long-term effects of people have died from myocarditis. People have died from thrombosis.
Sure. I mean, people have died from eating a jelly bean wrong, right? There's a million things that you could die from.
You're not making it mandatory to eat a jelly bean.
Right. Okay. But what I'm saying is when we're talking about this, right, we are talking about risk versus reward. It's not just 80s and 90-year-old people that are like at risk of dying from COVID-19.
What's the average age of COVID death?
It's somewhere in like 70s or like late 60s, early
average.
70s. Right. Yes. The
Meaning
average.
some have to skew even higher. And imagine how much
and lower.
All the ages before 70s that are included that would have to be foregone in terms of risk in order to arrive to an average age of above 70. I think the average age
there would also have to be an average age that is well below 70, like in people in their like mid to late 40s that still have a long life ahead of them, that still contribute to society, that are taking care of their children. I personally know 2 people who have lost aunts or like their parents to COVID-19 who have left behind children, right?
Yeah,
so we're talking about people
dangerous. Those people should be vaccinated. Those people that are at risk, and if I was over the age of 40, I would definitely get vaccinated. If I was obese, I would get vaccinated. If I had any risk at all, I would probably get.
Do you know how many people in the United States are obese?
Probably 43%.
That's a lot of people. How many
of those?
How many people? How many people do you think are like below the age of 40 that are obese? Probably a lot.
A lot, yeah.
So we're talking about like large segments of the population. You keep on trying to like really quick. You keep on saying like everybody's the only people that are at risk are people that are old and obese. Well, obese is like all across the entire United States.
You're misinterpreting what I'm saying.
I don't think I'm just going off of what you're saying.
I will interpret for you what I say. Listen, here's the deal. You have I'm not saying that anybody should not get vaccinated. I'm saying that you should have the option to get vaccinated, especially if you have, if you have a risk, if you're in a risk category, if you're obese, if you're old, if you have comorbidities, I actually encourage you. And if I had any of those things, any of those factors, I would personally make the choice to get vaccinated. But because I don't have any of those factors, because I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm fit, I work out, I play hockey, I don't feel the need to vaccinate myself in an effort to save somebody. First of all, I've already had COVID, so I have natural immunity, which we haven't even discussed. That skews the risk reward factor way in favor of not getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I had written the natural immunity.
But your whole point. But hold on, real quick. Your whole point is that I'm doing it not for myself, but for other people who themselves can get vaccinated to protect themselves.
But we're talking about like there's so many things that you're focusing on. One of the aspects that I'm talking about, right? Because it's not just that one person that can get vaccinated, right? But it's also the variants, right? It's also vectors for people to get sick and give it to people who can't get vaccinated, right? And even then, the vaccine doesn't make it impossible for you. Well, really. Who can't get vaccinated? People who are allergic to the vaccines.
So, how are they allergic to the vaccines?
Wait, you realize that this is a thing, right? Like there are some people that just can't get the vaccine. That's why even in the OSHA, like there are some conditions that make it to where you are either allergic to one of the ingredients in vaccines, or you are like particularly sensitive to vaccines, and they can like do more damage than just like trying to stay away from everybody. Like there's a lot of different reasons.
I'm not debating that that's real, but my point in asking that question.
I'm almost done. Done. Yeah. So like these are things that we have to worry about, right? And even with the natural immunity that you have, right, which is stronger than the like just the mRNA vaccine. I don't know about Johnson & Johnson. I don't know about like the older technology off the top of my head. But like with the mRNA vaccines that everyone's touting and everyone seems to be like the most scared of, right? those target a specific protein in COVID, right? Whereas natural immunity, your body produces like it throws spaghetti at the wall and it attacks like anything that it can get its hands on, right? Whereas one is like highly targeted towards this one spike protein. Your body attacks any protein that it can like happen to latch onto, and then that replicates over and over and over. So you do get more immunity from just getting sick, right? But two parts of that. Number one, if you get the vaccine on top of your natural immunity, it boosts it like 10 times more than.
No, it does. That's not true.
No, this is like absolutely true. Like
it's not true. I know the numbers on this. You actually boost it 7% more. This is from the Israel study. Double people that are vaccinated on top of, first of all, they're at even more risk for myocarditis after their second dose, even more so if they've already been infected with the virus prior. So in other words, if you're double vaccinated on top of getting the virus previously, you're at more risk of an adverse event.
When you say double vaccinated, do you mean like you've gotten
your second dose of Pfizer?
Okay.
Which is one they used in
I have never heard anyone make that claim before. Like every single conservative that I've talked to has admitted conceded that point. So if you have that study, I'd love to see it.
Well, I can see that it seems to boost your immunity.
Yeah, I was told between like 3 to 10%, or not percent, 3 to 10 times.
That doesn't even make any sense. You're already. I mean, how would that even work?
Because
you're already so immune.
Well, your body is like I said, it like throws spaghetti at the wall and it attacks just like any part of the virus that it gets its hands on. I don't know like how to explain it without like a visual aid. I'm not a biology major, but like it attacks any part of the.
I'm not asking, but I'm like from a mathematical perspective, I don't see how you could get 3 times the immunity if you're already like if there's already like 95% efficacious rate.
I don't think that natural immunity is 95 efficacious.
No, I'm talking about that's a vaccine. That's not even true, but that's what they claim. But
at first they had through the preliminary studies, with the limited amount of people that they had gone through like the studies with, there was like between 87 and 95%, but once it got into the broader population, we started seeing it dip down into like the 82 to 87%. And then once we got into like the variants getting around some of the immunity, then we get into lower, which is just goes to my point that if more people get vaccinated, the less likely that the virus is going to spread, right? So I mean,
if your only goal is to prevent the spread of the virus, then I guess I have to concede that that's a good policy. But that's not the way that we would also have far less car accident deaths, which is the number one cause of death for people under the age of 40. If we all just drove 20 miles an hour,
actually, that's the opposite. Like it's people being able to drive at a constant speed is the biggest predictor. It's not the actual speed.
If we made cars that only allowed you to go up to 20 miles per hour, how would you have more deaths than you?
I thought you just meant accidents.
Well, I mean, deaths. Like if you wanted to solve for deaths, which is the reason why you want to stop the spread, right? If you wanted to do that for any other form of peril.
Well, no, I've already laid out all the reasons why, right? It's not just deaths, because I recognize that with the vaccine and with like our healthcare system not overrun, it is approximately between
it's between 0.3 and 0.7% mortality rate, depending on which population group you're measuring.
So like that's what I'm like trying to get at. Like I recognize when our healthcare system isn't overrun, we're generally safe. That's what we don't want to happen, right? And I would really rather not have another strain of the virus that comes out that's so infectious that people are starting to have to go to the hospital despite being vaccinated, right? Because it's a new strain of the virus that we don't know like how deadly it is. Like that's what I would be concerned on, because this virus is always
adapting. It's always evolving. It's always creating new variants. Like that's the nature of a virus. It's what it does, and it goes down the path of least resistance. It can
only happen if more people get infected.
But they're getting infected even when they're vaccinated. It's an infectious disease.
It lowers the chance of being infected or spreading.
So does previous infection.
Right, but in order for but you have to get infected for that to happen, right?
But people are infected. They're infected by the millions. They're infected by the hundreds of millions. In fact, it's very likely. I imagine it's probably the case that in most
and then
parts
people
of this
can get it
country,
again
well, so they
with
can get it again
the
if they're
Delta
vaccinated.
variant.
In fact, the large body of evidence seems to state that you're 13 times less likely to get it if you had had the infection prior than if you had gotten the vaccine.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear
13
you
times
there.
less likely to get to get reinfected if you had gotten a prior infection than compared to somebody who only got the vaccine.
Right. No, I've already conceded that. We like, and I know
So
that
my
that's the
point
case.
is that if you,
but they have to get sick in the first place. Whereas with the vaccine, right, you don't have to get sick in the first place. That's where I'm all about prevention, right?
Okay, but what I'm saying to you is that you can see that the vaccine comes with some degree of risk. We don't know what it exactly is going to do to any individual person.
But
until
COVID comes with more risk.
On average for the whole population, but not for certain segments that you're asking to be vaccinated, including 12 to 15-year-olds. We know this.
Right, but the 12 and to 15-year-olds spread it to those people that have a higher risk of having.
Those people can be vaccinated. Those people can get vaccinated themselves. In addition to that, you're telling them to take an inordinate. You're telling the little kids, 12 to 15-year-old boys especially, to take an inordinate risk.
What does inordinate mean to you?
I mean disproportionate. I mean relatively large risk compared to what you would get as a reward in terms of immunity from the virus, from COVID.
You talking about the individuals or like the society at large?
I'm talking about the study that concluded that between 12 and 15-year-old boys, there is a 4 to 6 times more likelihood that they will end up in the hospital from myocarditis, from one adverse reaction to the vaccine. That's just one, compared to all reasons that they would go to the hospital for COVID. And so you're asking them to take an inordinate risk.
And you've already in your big point that you keep on like sticking to here is that children don't go to the hospital in the first place very often. Like it is an incredibly rare event. So if we take
how is that relevant to our discussion?
Because here I can pull up a calculator, right?
But what's the significance of this? What do you mean?
So 0.000, let's say, like for sake of argument, I don't know what the exact number is, right? Let's say it's a 0.00001, right? Five or 4 zeros before the 1, right? And then we multiply that by 6 times, like the maximum that you said, right? That's a 0.00006% chance that they're going to be hospitalized due to this thing.
I think you and I both know that we don't know if those numbers are correct.
Right. Yeah, that's why I'm saying.
Let's say they are correct, right? Let's say they are correct. Real quick, let's say that they are correct. When it looks like a number on your calculator, maybe it doesn't make a big deal or a big difference. But if that difference in those two numbers is individual people's lives, you can understand why a family wouldn't want their kid to be the one that's the sacrificial lamb for some 90-year-old.
No, 1 million. No, it's not just 90-year-olds, and that's the absurdity.
Even if it's one out of a million.
Really quick. You're in even. This is the problem I have. You keep on reaching to these absurd levels, but it's not just people that are 90 years old. There are fucking 30-year-olds that are obese that are still have a long life ahead of them, right? There are 40-year-olds.
Let's go with the average age. Let's go with the average age. 70, what is it? 74, 75?
Let's go 70.
You're looking at a
70-year-old
calculator, right? It's all about the calculator risk, according to you. So then let's go by the average. 74-year-old. Does the
40% of people that are obese?
Or
the amount of people that are diabetic, or the amount of people that have like asthma.
Notice how only one side of this equation has individuals associated with it. When you were talking about the risk to children, you were doing it on a calculator. When you're talking about the risk to the people that could potentially get infected, you're talking about, it could be a 30-year-old with the obesity problems. Well,
right,
you know what?
No, this is ridiculous because I'm trying to point out that there are other extant things that we've already talked about that can be a comorbidity towards COVID, right? If we're talking about just age, then yeah, we're only talking about people like that are like once you reach 50, it's something like quadruple the chance that you're going to die of COVID, right? Whereas like we're not just talking about age. Age isn't the only people that we're worried about here. There are large segments of the population that aren't just old, right? If you're just looking at that one metric, then yeah, it does seem like a little bit absurd to make a whole bunch of people take an undue risk, which I don't think that this is an undue risk, but it would be like an undue risk.
What do you mean you don't think it's an undue risk? The numbers don't agree with you. The data tells you.
You've already told me that it was like a less than like 0.001% chance, right? for a kid to get.
I don't think it's that low, but let's say we go. I gave that to you as an example so that you could do your math problem on it. 5 to 6 times that number, sure, but that represents what, 15, 20, 30, 50 people. How many people is it worth? And those are individual people who have to take on that risk. So knowing that you're going to have to take a vaccine,
like it would be really sad if like there are people that have like really bad reactions to the vaccine. And we recognize whenever we make any vaccine, whenever we make any medicine, that there are going to be some people that have adverse reactions to it, right? But that doesn't mean
we don't make
really
people
quick,
who are not
that
at risk
doesn't
for
mean-
that what that medicine is supposed to resolve take the medicine. That's the difference.
It's not necessarily a difference because there are jobs, right? And really quick, I have to take my headphones off, so I'm going to just speak for a second. There are jobs that make people get vaccines. There are, like, if you want to go into the public school system, you do have to take vaccines. All of these things are forced in order to like go into these institutions, to go into work, right? So these are things that
But that's not true, though. That's just not true.
No, it is true.
It's not true. You don't have to take a vaccine for the flu to go to school. But that's what you're asking.
You do have to get mumps and polio. Like you have, like there are risks associated with that.
But those are viruses that have an inordinate risk to children.
Those have an inordinate
polio was
risk
killing or paralyzing thousands of kids every year.
Okay.
Before the vaccine.
Okay, but we're talking about really quick. We're talking about the risk of the vaccine to that individual.
Okay.
All right.
But the risk reward factor for those viruses is clearly in favor of vaccination for those particular viruses. Not
because you're only looking at that one individual.
Yes, because those are the people that we traditionally vaccinate, are the people that are at risk for what you're vaccinating them for. That's we never force vaccinated anybody for something that they weren't at risk for themselves.
We force vaccinated people
for what?
For polio, for fucking.
Yes, because kids are at risk of polio.
But we didn't just vaccinate kids.
Okay.
We vaccinated the adults.
Okay, because they're also at risk of polio. What do you mean?
Yeah, but they weren't at nearly as much at risk as the kids were. Like the kids could be paralyzed for life.
Sure they were. What do you mean? Adults were dying from polio as well. They were dying from
mumps, not at the same rate as kids. The kids were at much greater risk from mumps, measles, and
what mandatory vaccine besides the one on the child's schedule are you acknowledging for polio for adults? What job title? Like I've worked for many jobs. Not one of them has ever asked for my polio vaccination.
Most of the jobs that are going to require you to have some vaccination is going to be ones that require you to travel for work, or ones that are in like the healthcare industry. I recognize that most
jobs. I've never worked in healthcare, but every other job I've had that I've had to travel for, not one of them has ever required me to have a polio vaccine.
I'm sorry. Did you just say specifically the polio, or do you mean any vaccine?
No job I've ever had has ever asked for a vaccine.
You didn't have to take a vaccine before you like went to another continent?
No, I didn't have to show them my vaccination records before I went to another continent. No, I went on a cruise though, so I don't know if that's different. But that's the way
I don't know if the cruise is different. From what I understand, in order to go to some countries, like you have to get a vaccination from viruses that are there that are no longer here, right? We don't like worry about there's a specific virus that I know that we don't worry about here anymore, but like is rampant in places like in the Middle East or in Africa or in
there's a couple of those things that work in both ways. Yeah,
and so like you have to get that vaccine to go over there, otherwise you're putting yourself at like great risk
in
your job will make you do it.
Yeah, sure, but I mean but you're talking about people that just want to live their lives here in the United States. These are like. It's a different category of people.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like the fact that there are some situations in which we force people to take vaccines, whether or not they like necessarily need it just for themselves, because we're not all living like Bubble Boy, right? We don't live in our own individual bubbles. Right? We have to go out. Sure. We have to go to the grocery store. We have to go to Target to get fucking brooms. We have to go to fucking Kroger to get Doritos and shit because we're all gamers. All right. Like these are things that we have to do in order for the individual to survive. You have to interact with society. Right. And that's why we have to social contract. You have to be able to give up some things in order to create an adequate environment for the rest of society to flourish, right? I think that, and I recognize that you're like super, I can tell, like super into the individual, and I think that individual rights are really important, but I think that I would go further with some individual rights like vaccine mandates that you probably wouldn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're discussing. Can we do this? I'm so sorry, dude. I forgot about a fucking work meeting. Can I come back on? Like, I'd love to finish this conversation actually, because you're
Sure.
somewhat
About how long is the meeting going to take?
It could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, but if I see you on, I'll ping you real quick if that's
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. I'm going to be straight. This is my full-time thing, so
Oh,
I'll
sweet.
be here. Right.
Yeah, dude. I'll hit you up again. I'm sorry, I just have this work meeting.
No, it's all good, man.
All right, brother.
All right, bye. All right, we're going to fact check. I've gotta know. There's some things here that like don't make any sense. Hoy.